In the dimly lit chambers of the Palazzo Vecchio, where shadows danced across worn stone walls and whispered conversations could determine the fate of nations, Niccolò Machiavelli developed what would become history's most penetrating system of human assessment. It was the autumn of 1513, and the former secretary of the Florentine Republic found himself in exile, stripped of power but not of the razor-sharp intellect that had made him indispensable to the Medici court for over a decade. During those long nights of reflection, as he penned what would later become The Prince, Machiavelli refined a methodology that allowed him to dissect human nature with surgical precision. This was not mere observation, but a systematic approach to understanding the fundamental drives that motivated every person he encountered. Through years of political maneuvering, diplomatic missions, and court intrigue, he had witnessed the rise and fall of princes, the loyalty and betrayal of allies, and the delicate balance between strength and weakness that determined who would survive and who would perish in the ruthless arena of power. The foundation of Machiavelli's approach rested on a profound understanding that most people live their lives wearing elaborate masks, presenting carefully constructed versions of themselves to the world. But beneath these facades lay three fundamental characteristics that, once identified, would reveal the true nature of any individual. These were not abstract philosophical concepts, but practical tools forged in the crucible of Renaissance politics, where miscalculating someone's character could mean the difference between elevation and execution. The first of these filters emerged from Machiavelli's observation of countless encounters with both peasants and princes. He noticed that within moments of meeting someone, certain behavioral patterns would emerge that revealed their deepest psychological foundations. The second filter addressed the question of how individuals responded to pressure and adversity, while the third examined their relationship with their own perceived weaknesses and limitations. Together, these three assessments formed a complete picture of any person's fundamental character structure. What made this system particularly ruthless was its unflinching honesty. Machiavelli had long ago abandoned the comfortable illusions that most people maintained about human nature. He had seen too many good intentions crumble under pressure, witnessed too many noble speeches dissolve into cowardly actions, and observed too many displays of strength that masked profound inner fragility. His filters were designed not to flatter or console, but to reveal truth in its rawest form. The genius of this approach lay not just in its accuracy, but in its speed. In a world where alliances shifted like sand and yesterday's friend could become tomorrow's executioner, the ability to rapidly assess character was not a luxury but a survival necessity. Machiavelli understood that extensive observation and lengthy relationship building were privileges that political leaders rarely enjoyed. Decisions about trust, alliance, and enmity often had to be made in the span of a single conversation, based on the smallest of behavioral cues and the briefest of interactions. Part 1, the fear response filter. The cornerstone of Machiavelli's character assessment system began with what he termed the fear response filter. This was not simply about identifying what frightened a person, but understanding how they processed and reacted to fear itself. In the turbulent political landscape of Renaissance Italy, where betrayal was commonplace and power shifts occurred with breathtaking speed, Machiavelli had observed that an individual's relationship with fear was the most reliable predictor of their future behavior under pressure. During his tenure as a diplomatic envoy, Machiavelli had countless opportunities to observe this principle in action. He recalled vividly his meeting with Cesare Borgia, the notorious Duke of Valentinois, in the winter of 1502. As he entered Borgia's chambers in Imola, Machiavelli immediately began his assessment. The Duke's posture was erect but not rigid, his movements deliberate but not rushed, his gaze direct but not aggressive. Most tellingly, when news arrived of a potential uprising in one of his territories, Borgia's response was neither panic nor dismissive bravado, but immediate, calculated action. This encounter taught Machiavelli that fear responses fell into distinct categories, each revealing fundamental aspects of character. The first category consisted of those who were paralyzed by fear. These individuals, when confronted with uncertainty or threat, became immobilized, unable to make decisions or take action. They might appear calm on the surface, but their inaction in critical moments revealed a deep-seated terror of making the wrong choice. Machiavelli noted that such people, while potentially useful as followers when circumstances were stable, became dangerous liabilities during times of crisis. The second category included those who responded to fear with frantic, poorly considered action. These individuals confused motion with progress, believing that any action was better than thoughtful inaction. They were easy to identify by their tendency to interrupt, their rapid speech patterns, and their eagerness to offer solutions before fully understanding problems. While their energy could be useful in certain situations, Machiavelli recognized that their fear-driven impulsiveness made them unreliable allies and dangerous enemies. The third and most valuable category consisted of those who acknowledged fear as information rather than instruction. These rare individuals neither denied their fears nor allowed themselves to be controlled by them. Instead, they processed fear as a signal that required analysis and response. When Machiavelli observed someone in this category, he would note their pause before responding to threatening news, their questions about details and implications, and their ability to maintain perspective even when under pressure. The practical application of this filter required careful observation of microexpressions and behavioral patterns that most people overlooked. Machiavelli developed an almost supernatural ability to detect the subtle signs that revealed how someone processed fear. The slight tightening around the eyes when unexpected news was delivered, the barely perceptible change in breathing patterns when faced with uncertainty, the way someone's hands moved when they felt threatened, all of these provided crucial information about their fundamental character structure. One particularly revealing test that Machiavelli employed was what he called the unexpected reversal. During conversations, he would deliberately introduce information that challenged the other person's assumptions or expectations. A casual mention of a mutual acquaintance's fall from grace, a seemingly innocent reference to changing political alliances, or a hypothetical scenario that threatened the status quo, all served to reveal how quickly and effectively someone could adapt their thinking when their comfortable assumptions were challenged. The sophistication of this approach lay in its recognition that fear responses were not simply about courage or cowardice, but about cognitive flexibility and emotional regulation. Machiavelli understood that the most dangerous people were often those who appeared fearless not because they were truly brave, but because they were too psychologically rigid to accurately assess threats. Such individuals might charge headlong into situations that required subtlety and nuance, creating chaos and destruction not from malice but from their inability to process complexity. Conversely, he learned to value those who showed appropriate fear responses while maintaining their ability to function effectively. A general who felt no anxiety before battle was likely to make tactical errors born of overconfidence, while one who acknowledged the gravity of the situation while still making clear-headed decisions would adapt and survive. This understanding allowed Machiavelli to identify natural leaders and reliable allies among people that others might dismiss as cautious or hesitant. The fear response filter also revealed crucial information about an individual's relationship with power and responsibility. Those who sought power but feared its consequences were destined to become tyrants, using increasingly desperate measures to maintain control as their anxiety grew. Those who feared power itself often made the most effective advisors, as their reluctance to seize authority for themselves allowed them to provide honest counsel without personal agenda. Perhaps most importantly, this filter identified those rare individuals who had achieved what Machiavelli considered the ideal relationship with fear. They understood it as a natural and valuable emotion that provided important information about their environment, but they refused to allow it to dictate their actions. These people could be trusted in crisis situations because their decision-making process was not compromised by either reckless fearlessness or paralyzing anxiety. The practical implications of the fear response filter extended far beyond political maneuvering. In any situation where trust and reliability mattered, whether in business partnerships, military alliances, or personal relationships, understanding how someone processed fear provided crucial insight into their likely behavior under stress. Machiavelli recognized that most people revealed their true character not in moments of comfort and success, but in those critical instances when their carefully maintained facades crumbled under pressure. This understanding led him to deliberately create situations that would reveal these patterns. A seemingly casual conversation about recent difficulties faced by mutual acquaintances, a hypothetical question about resource scarcity, or a gentle probing of someone's contingency plans all served to illuminate how they thought about and prepared for potential threats. Those who had never seriously considered adverse scenarios often revealed their psychological fragility through their discomfort with such discussions, while those who had developed genuine resilience could engage with difficult topics without becoming emotionally destabilized. The fear response filter ultimately served as the foundation for all of Machiavelli's subsequent assessments. It provided the basic framework for understanding whether someone could be relied upon when circumstances became challenging, whether they would make rational decisions under pressure, and whether their apparent strengths were genuine capabilities or mere performances that would collapse when tested. This made it an indispensable tool for anyone seeking to navigate complex social and political environments where the stakes of misjudging character could be catastrophically high. Part 2, the Ambition Calibration Test. Building upon the insights gained from the fear response filter, Machiavelli developed his second assessment tool, the Ambition Calibration Test. This sophisticated evaluation method emerged from his recognition that ambition itself was morally neutral. It was the relationship between an individual's ambitions and their capabilities, resources, and ethical boundaries that revealed their true character and potential value or danger as allies or enemies. The genesis of this filter could be traced to Machiavelli's extensive observation of court dynamics and his analysis of why some ambitious individuals rose to great heights while others destroyed themselves and everyone around them in pursuit of their goals. During his years of service in the Florentine government, he had witnessed the spectacular rise and catastrophic fall of figures like Girolamo Savonarola, whose religious ambitions had initially inspired a city but ultimately led to chaos and his own execution. The ambition calibration test operated on the principle that the distance between someone's ambitions and their realistic assessment of their own capabilities was one of the most reliable predictors of their future behavior. Those whose ambitions far exceeded their abilities were destined to become dangerous to themselves and others, as they would be forced to rely increasingly on deception, manipulation, and desperate measures to bridge the gap between their aspirations and reality. Machiavelli's approach to assessing ambition began with careful observation of how individuals spoke about their goals and aspirations. He noted that truly dangerous people often revealed themselves through the grandiosity of their language and the vagueness of their plans. They spoke in sweeping generalities about transformation and glory but had little concrete understanding of the practical steps required to achieve their objectives. Their conversations were filled with references to destiny and inevitable success, but lacked the detailed knowledge that genuine competence required. In contrast, those whose ambitions were properly calibrated to their capabilities demonstrated a different pattern of speech and behavior. They spoke specifically about tactics and timelines, showed detailed knowledge of obstacles and resources, and demonstrated realistic assessment of risks and potential setbacks. Most importantly, they could articulate not just what they wanted to achieve, but why they were uniquely positioned to achieve it and what specific advantages they possessed over potential competitors. The sophistication of this evaluation method lay in its recognition that the absence of ambition was often as problematic as excessive ambition. Machiavelli understood that individuals who claimed to want nothing were either lying or so psychologically damaged that they could not be relied upon for anything meaningful. The complete absence of personal drive made people unpredictable in ways that were often more dangerous than obvious self-interest, because there was no rational basis for predicting their behavior or ensuring their loyalty. One of the most revealing aspects of the ambition calibration test involved observing how people responded to unexpected opportunities or setbacks. Those with well-calibrated ambitions adjusted their strategies based on changing circumstances while maintaining their fundamental objectives. They could recognize when conditions favored advancement and when prudent withdrawal was necessary. Their flexibility in tactics combined with consistency in core goals made them reliable allies and formidable opponents. Conversely, those with poorly calibrated ambitions showed characteristic patterns of rigidity when faced with unexpected developments. When opportunities arose that exceeded their capabilities, they often overextended themselves catastrophically. When setbacks occurred, they either abandoned their goals entirely or doubled down on failed strategies rather than adapting their approach. This inflexibility made them both unreliable as allies and predictable as enemies. Machiavelli also developed subtle techniques for testing ambition calibration during normal conversation. He might casually mention a position of authority that had recently become available, or describe a hypothetical scenario that offered significant opportunity but required substantial risk. The responses to such conversational gambits revealed enormous amounts of information about how someone assessed their own capabilities and limitations. Those with realistic self-assessment would show interest proportional to their actual qualifications and would ask practical questions about requirements and obstacles. Those with grandiose self-perception would immediately begin explaining why they were perfect for any opportunity mentioned, regardless of their actual preparation or suitability. Most tellingly, those with imposter syndrome or excessive self-doubt would immediately begin explaining why they could never qualify for any significant opportunity, even when their credentials were clearly adequate. The ambition calibration test also revealed crucial information about an individual's relationship with power and responsibility. Machiavelli observed that those who sought authority for its own sake often had the poorest calibration between their ambitions and capabilities. They were attracted to the appearance of power rather than its substance, and their lack of understanding of what effective leadership actually required made them dangerous when they achieved positions of authority. More valuable were those who sought specific outcomes rather than general authority. A merchant who wanted to establish new trade routes, a general who aimed to implement innovative military tactics, or a scholar who hoped to advance human knowledge, these individuals typically had much better calibration because their ambitions were grounded in concrete expertise rather than abstract desire for status. The temporal dimension of ambition also provided crucial insights. Machiavelli noticed that those with realistic ambitions could articulate reasonable timelines for achieving their goals and could explain the intermediate steps required for success. They understood that significant achievements required sustained effort over extended periods, and they had developed the patience and persistence necessary for long-term projects. In contrast, those seeking immediate gratification or overnight transformation revealed fundamental misunderstanding of how complex goals were achieved. Their impatience often led them to attempt shortcuts that ultimately undermined their objectives, or to abandon promising initiatives when they did not produce immediate results. This pattern made them unreliable partners for any endeavor that required sustained collaboration or long-term commitment. Perhaps most importantly, the ambition calibration test identified those rare individuals who had achieved what Machiavelli considered the ideal balance: substantial goals matched with realistic assessment of their own capabilities and genuine understanding of what achieving those goals would require. These people could be trusted to pursue their objectives in ways that were both effective and ethical, because they had no need to rely on deception or desperation to bridge gaps between aspiration and ability. The practical application of this filter extended far beyond political contexts. In any situation where collaboration, delegation, or alliance was necessary, understanding the calibration between someone's ambitions and capabilities was essential for predicting their reliability and effectiveness. Those with poor calibration would either underperform due to excessive caution or create chaos through overreach, while those with good calibration could be counted on to contribute meaningfully to shared objectives. This understanding also provided crucial insights into how to motivate and manage different types of people. Those with excessive ambition needed to be given challenging but achievable objectives that would channel their drive constructively, while those with insufficient ambition required inspiration and encouragement to recognize and pursue opportunities that matched their capabilities. The key was understanding that motivation strategies had to be tailored to each individual's specific relationship with their own potential. The ambition calibration test ultimately served as a bridge between understanding someone's fundamental fear responses and assessing their capacity for self-transformation and growth. It revealed not just what people wanted to achieve, but their realistic chances of achieving it and the methods they were likely to employ in pursuit of their goals. This made it an indispensable component of any comprehensive character assessment system. Part 3, the self-destruction indicator. The final and, perhaps most crucial element of Machiavelli's character assessment system was what he termed the self-destruction indicator. This sophisticated evaluation tool emerged from his recognition that the greatest threat most people faced was not external enemies or adverse circumstances, but their own psychological patterns and self-defeating behaviors. Through decades of observing political rise and fall, personal triumphs and disasters, Machiavelli had come to understand that those who learned to identify and eliminate their own weaknesses became virtually indestructible, while those who remained slaves to their psychological limitations would eventually destroy themselves regardless of their initial advantages. The development of this filter was deeply influenced by Machiavelli's study of classical philosophy and his observation of contemporary political figures. He had watched brilliant military commanders defeat themselves through hubris, seen wealthy merchants destroy their own enterprises through paranoia, and witnessed charismatic leaders alienate their followers through inability to control their tempers. These patterns convinced him that self-awareness and self-discipline were more valuable than any external resource or natural talent. The self-destruction indicator operated on the principle that everyone possessed psychological vulnerabilities that could be exploited by circumstances or enemies, but that the most successful and dangerous individuals were those who had identified these vulnerabilities and developed strategies to neutralize them. This was not about achieving perfection, but about honest self-assessment and practical adaptation to one's own limitations. Machiavelli's approach to evaluating self-destruction potential began with observing how people responded to their own mistakes and failures. He noted that there were distinct patterns in how individuals processed personal setbacks, and these patterns were highly predictive of their long-term success or failure. Those who repeated the same errors despite experiencing negative consequences revealed an inability to learn from experience that virtually guaranteed their eventual downfall. The most dangerous pattern was what Machiavelli identified as justified repetition, the tendency to rationalize failed strategies rather than abandoning them. He observed that individuals caught in this pattern would modify superficial details of their approach while maintaining the fundamental flaws that had caused their previous failures. They might change tactics or timing, but they refused to acknowledge that their core assumptions or methods were problematic. This pattern was particularly common among those who had experienced early success in their chosen fields. Having achieved initial victories through particular approaches, they became psychologically invested in those methods and interpreted subsequent failures as execution problems rather than strategic errors. This made them increasingly predictable and vulnerable to opponents who could recognize their patterns and exploit their inflexibility. In contrast, those with low self-destruction potential demonstrated what Machiavelli called ruthless self-honesty. They could acknowledge their mistakes without destroying their self-confidence, analyze their failures without becoming paralyzed by self-doubt, and modify their approaches without abandoning their core objectives. Most importantly, they could distinguish between strategies that had failed due to poor execution and those that were fundamentally flawed regardless of implementation quality. The temporal aspect of self-reflection also provided crucial insights. Machiavelli observed that some individuals engaged in immediate, emotional postmortems of their failures that focused on blame assignment and emotional catharsis rather than practical learning. Others avoided reflecting on failures entirely, preferring to move on quickly rather than confront uncomfortable truths about their own limitations. Both patterns indicated high self-destruction potential. The most valuable individuals were those who delayed their emotional processing of failures until they could analyze them objectively. They understood that immediate post-failure analysis was likely to be distorted by disappointment, anger, or embarrassment, and they had developed the discipline to postpone evaluation until they could examine events with clarity and honesty. This patience with their own learning process made them progressively more effective over time rather than simply more experienced. Machiavelli also developed techniques for testing self-destruction potential through conversation and observation. He would deliberately introduce topics related to common human weaknesses, pride, greed, lust, anger, fear, and observe how people responded to discussions of these vulnerabilities. Those who immediately became defensive or dismissive revealed their inability to honestly examine their own psychological patterns. Those who could discuss such topics with detachment and insight demonstrated the self-awareness necessary for continued growth and adaptation. Perhaps the most revealing test involved observing how individuals responded to criticism or challenging feedback. Machiavelli noted that those with high self-destruction potential either became defensive and angry when their weaknesses were identified, or they became excessively self-critical and paralyzed by negative feedback. Both responses indicated an unhealthy relationship with personal limitations that would prevent effective learning and adaptation. Those with low self-destruction potential demonstrated a different pattern entirely. They could receive criticism without becoming emotionally destabilized, extract useful information from even hostile or poorly delivered feedback, and distinguish between valid concerns and irrelevant attacks. Most importantly, they could maintain their self-confidence while acknowledging areas for improvement, allowing them to grow without becoming psychologically fragmented. The self-destruction indicator also revealed crucial information about how individuals managed their natural human appetites and impulses. Machiavelli understood that everyone experienced desires for pleasure, status, revenge, or comfort that could potentially compromise their judgment and effectiveness. The key distinction was between those who were controlled by these impulses and those who had learned to manage them strategically. Those controlled by their appetites were relatively easy to manipulate and predict, as their behavior would consistently reflect their immediate desires rather than their long-term interests. They might be temporarily effective when their impulses aligned with their objectives, but they would inevitably make self-defeating choices when their appetites conflicted with their responsibilities or goals. More sophisticated were those who had learned to satisfy their appetites in ways that enhanced rather than undermined their effectiveness. They understood that complete suppression of natural desires was both impossible and counterproductive, but they had developed strategies for channeling these energies constructively. A leader might satisfy their need for recognition by achieving genuine accomplishments rather than by demanding empty praise, or they might address their competitive instincts by focusing on defeating external competitors rather than undermining their own allies. The highest level of development was represented by those who had transcended the simple satisfaction of appetites and had found meaning and motivation in purposes larger than their immediate desires. These individuals were not free from human wants and needs, but they had developed identity and purpose structures that made their personal limitations increasingly irrelevant to their effectiveness. Machiavelli's concept of destroying the weak self was not about eliminating human nature, but about developing such clear understanding of one's own psychological patterns that those patterns could no longer sabotage one's conscious objectives. This required both honest self-assessment and practical strategies for managing one's own limitations. Those who achieved this level of self-mastery became extraordinarily difficult to defeat because their enemies could not rely on their own self-destructive tendencies to undermine their effectiveness. The practical applications of the self-destruction indicator extended far beyond political or military contexts. In any situation where long-term success required sustained effort and adaptation, understanding someone's capacity for self-correction and growth was essential for predicting their reliability and potential. Those with high self-destruction potential might be effective in short-term or narrowly defined roles, but they would eventually undermine themselves in positions requiring flexibility, learning, or long-term perspective. The ultimate insight of Machiavelli's assessment system was that character was not fixed, but that individuals varied dramatically in their capacity and willingness to recognize and address their own limitations. Those who had developed this capacity became progressively more valuable as allies and more formidable as opponents over time, while those who remained trapped by their psychological patterns became increasingly predictable and vulnerable regardless of their natural talents or external advantages. This understanding provided a framework for evaluating not just current capability, but future potential. It explained why some individuals with modest initial abilities eventually achieved great success while others with obvious talents failed to fulfill their apparent potential. Most importantly, it suggested that the most valuable human quality was not the absence of weakness, but the presence of honest self-awareness and the discipline to act on that awareness regardless of immediate emotional comfort. The integration of all three filters, fear response, ambition calibration, and self-destruction potential, created a comprehensive system for rapidly assessing human character that remained remarkably accurate across different contexts and cultures. Machiavelli's genius lay not in identifying isolated behavioral patterns, but in recognizing the interconnected psychological structures that determined how individuals would respond to the inevitable challenges and opportunities that life presented to them. Those who passed all three assessments, who could process fear as information rather than instruction, who maintained realistic relationships between their ambitions and capabilities, and who had developed honest self-awareness and practical self-discipline, represented the highest form of human reliability and potential. They could be trusted to act rationally under pressure, to pursue achievable goals through effective methods, and to learn and adapt when circumstances required change. Conversely, those who failed any of the assessments revealed specific vulnerabilities that could be predicted and, if necessary, exploited. The fearful could be paralyzed through uncertainty, the grandiose could be led into overextension, and the self-destructive could be relied upon to undermine themselves given sufficient time and pressure. The enduring relevance of Machiavelli's system lay in its recognition of fundamental human psychological patterns that transcended specific historical or cultural contexts. Whether applied to Renaissance princes or modern business leaders, to military commanders or academic researchers, to political figures or personal relationships, the basic structure of human motivation and limitation remained remarkably consistent. Those who understood these patterns gained enormous advantages in any situation requiring collaboration, competition, or conflict with other human beings. Perhaps most importantly, Machiavelli's filters provided a framework not just for assessing others, but for honest self-evaluation and development. By applying these same ruthless standards to one's own behavior and psychological patterns, it became possible to identify and address personal vulnerabilities before they could be exploited by circumstances or opponents. This transformation from external assessment tool to internal development framework represented the ultimate evolution of Machiavelli's insights, from a method for understanding others to a pathway for transcending one's own limitations and achieving genuine personal and professional effectiveness. In the end, Machiavelli's revolutionary contribution was not just providing tools for political maneuvering or social manipulation, but revealing the fundamental psychological structures that determine human success and failure across all domains of life. His three ruthless filters remained as relevant in the modern world as they had been in Renaissance Italy, because they addressed the timeless challenge of understanding and working effectively with human nature in all its complexity, contradiction, and potential.